All right, good day everyone. My name is Samuel Bro. I'm from the Mental Health Commission, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our 12th webinar in our series on implementing the national standards. Before we begin, it would be great if everyone could introduce themselves through the chat function, which can be found on the right of your screen. As shown on slide, you'll see that if you don't see the chat box, you scroll to the top of your screen and a chat option should appear. This is where you can ask questions or make comments either during or after the presentation. When asking a question, please send them to all participants, which can be found in the drop-down menu beneath the chat screen. I also want to mention that this webinar is being recorded, so it can be archived on the MHCC website following the presentation, and so you can go on the website and see past presentations there as well. A French version of the slides that you'll see today will also be made available in the coming week or two on the website. Due to the large number of participants today, you are all on mute. I think we have something close to over 600 registrations, which is really fantastic. So again, we thank you for joining us. If you have any questions for me only, please send it to the host, which can also be found in a drop-down tab in the chat function. So I'd like to introduce you to the presenters today. And so as I said, my name is Samuel Bro. I work at the Mental Health Commission as a program manager under the workplace team. One of our main areas of focus is on the national standard for psychological health and safety. And I oversee areas of public service, laborers and unions, as well as the Quebec outreach strategy. Joining us today for the presentations is Sjors Reijers. And Sjors is Program Manager with Mental Health First Aid, National Program Promotions and Business Development. Sorry, that's your proper title. And as you can imagine, Sjors is literally wearing the same tie and shirt that you can see in the picture on the slide. And so you can pretty much imagine seeing him in front of you as he'll be speaking shortly. And so Sjors, in his role, is responsible for working with companies, nonprofit organizations, public and private groups to raise awareness about mental health and arrange mental health first aid courses. He also regularly communicates with the network of over 1,000 mental health first aid instructors that we have across the country. Also joining us is Maureen Carnegie from Humber College. Maureen has a Bachelor's of Social Work degree and a Master's of Education in Counseling Psychology. She has extensive experience working in community mental health, and for the past 14 years has worked at Humber College as a disabilities consultant, supporting students in their academic endeavors. Maureen is currently assigned to Humber's Mental Health First Aid Project, enjoying traveling across Ontario to deliver the course to college employees. Now I'll pass it over to Sjors to start the conversation, but just before that, I do want to let everyone know about the way we'll proceed today. And so as a first overview, we'll provide an overview of the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, making that link with workplace mental health. But I just want to give a heads up to everyone that we won't be going into detail on the standard. Rather, the presentation today, the goal of the presentation is to allow us to see the links between the standard and mental health first aid. And so we'll spend most of our time talking about the first aid program, and then Maureen will enable us to look at the Humber College's experience in implementing the first aid program, and then we'll follow by a question period. So over to Sjors.
Thank you very much, Sam. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are in the country. I'm seeing in the chat box that we are being represented, looks like almost, if not every province and territory in Canada. That's fantastic news. I also see a lot of names I recognize as mental health first aid instructors. Thank you all for joining the call. And for those of you who are not yet instructors or trained in mental health first aid, thanks for coming. We look forward to seeing you at a course sometime soon. As Sam mentioned, I am wearing the exact same clothes today as I was wearing in my headshot day. I'd like to say that was an accident, but it wasn't. I did it on purpose, so I wouldn't be putting up any false pretense for you today. What you see is what you get with me today. Following from Sam's introduction with mental health first aid, I went through, there was a lot of questions and comments that came in with the registrations. I went through those, and I'm going to provide my presentation by grouping some of those questions together and delivering the presentation based on those questions. So to follow on what Sam said, what we won't be covering that did come up in the registration questions, are things around, specifics around the standard itself, and also anything around signs and symptoms or intervention strategies for mental health problems. Those kinds of things are covered in the mental health first aid course, which we're not doing today. Today is about talking what the course is and isn't, and how it can help workplaces. So that's the general gist of the presentation today. What we will cover is a brief overview of mental health in the workplace in Canada to provide some context to why mental health first aid exists in the workplace. An overview of the course itself, including things like content, length, delivery options, and some of the evaluated outcomes and impacts of the course. And finally, we'll hand it over to Maureen for probably what will be the most exciting part, which is to learn how an organization has implemented mental health first aid both within their own workplace and then taken it a step further to implement it across a sector within a province. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to limit myself to about 20 minutes today, and then leave lots of time for Maureen and lots of time for questions at the end. So we'll get started with a bit of context. This is a slide that we show in our presentations, and it's a pretty, you might have seen it before in your travels through mental health in the workplace. Mental health problems and illnesses will impact 1 in 5 Canadians every single year. And by the age of 35, about half of us will have or have had a mental illness. If you look at the graph there, the green line is the mental health problems in the workplace, in the population generally in 2011. The red bar is 2041, so 30 years into the future. And they track pretty similarly until you get to the 70 to 79 and 80 to 89 range, and you'll see that the 2041 numbers are way higher than 2011 numbers. And I'm not sure what the demographic is on the call, but I know that's my cohort. That's my generation right there. So this problem, mental health in Canada is a real issue for me because it's my generation that is going to be most impacted by that in about 30 years' time. I think a lot of you are in the same place as me. So in Canada, 25% of employees believe their supervisor manages mental health issues effectively. That's a low number that needs to increase. Employers are being held more legally responsible for psychological health and safety, as I'm sure many of you are aware on this call. And nearly 3 in 4 people say they have stopped doing things they wanted to do for fear of stigma and discrimination. A lot of the comments we received during registration were around stigma and stigma reduction in the workplace. A couple of stats, I won't go into these too deeply. You can look at these yourselves after the fact if you like. 82% of organizations rank mental health conditions in their top 3 causes of short-term disability. Approximate $6 billion of lost productivity in 2011. And if we don't address mental health problems, the costs to business will be close to $200 billion in the next 30 years. So there's a serious financial incentive if other incentives weren't enough to do something about the problems. In terms of benefits, for positive workplace mental health, if you need a refresher of why it's good to have positive mental health in the workplace, one, of course, is productivity. So with 1 in 6 employees likely to experience problems with stress at any time, productivity can be significantly affected by mental health. You can increase your recruitment and retention by offering a workplace that supports personal and professional growth. Cost savings, of course, due to disability and absenteeism. There's a term we use called presenteeism. If you haven't heard of it, it is when somebody comes to work but doesn't actually produce much while they're at work for a variety of reasons. It's called presenteeism. So that also has a cost to the employer. Reducing conflict in a positive mental health workplace, and then operational success, you'll get more done and be more productive if everyone's feeling more positive in terms of mental health. So that's the general context of the landscape in Canada. Mental health problems, I'm sure you're all aware, the conversation has exploded in the last 5 or 6 years around mental health among Canadians in generally and in the workplace specifically. We're paying more attention now than we ever have. The media is offering avenues for us to have this conversation. And the national standard for psychological health and safety is evidence of that conversation, as is the proliferation of mental health first aid across the country. So in terms of putting some more context around mental health first aid and the national standard, I'm going to hand it back to Sam for a few minutes to talk a bit more about the national standard itself.
Thanks, Sjors. And so as Sjors was mentioning, there is a lot of momentum growing across Canada around conversations in workplace mental health, and part of that conversation is the National Standard on Psychological Health and Safety. And in January 2013, the Mental Health Commission worked with CSA and B&Q to release the world's first standard for psychological health and safety. And so it really enables organizations to start looking at mental health in the same way that we do for physical health and safety. And so just really a high-level overview. The standard's intent is really to provide support, positive mental health for everyone in an organization. So some of the benefits that we could see from implementing a standard in an organization would be looking at reducing stigma, reducing stressors that can be caused and controlled in the workplace. And then at the more positive side of things, we're looking at happier workplaces, enhanced productivity, and overall better performance. And so if we look at defining what are the two key goals of the standard, I guess it's really about preventing the psychological harm that are due to the conditions that the workplace creates for employees. And so we're not looking at eliminating the risk factors that we don't have control, but it's really how do we make sure that interactions between employees can be positive and that employees can feel happy and productive and confident in their work. And the other aspect of it is really promoting psychological health. And so we talk a lot about mental illness, but what is a mentally healthy workplace? What do we envision? And so the standard really helps an organization set that framework and make sure they're moving forward together. So specifically, the standard is a set of guidelines, tools, and resources that can help an organization promote and protect psychological health. And so we really explain it as a framework where you can look at all of the different aspects in an organization and that can help you see where there might be risks related to psychological health and then enable you to develop some measures that can help control and improve those aspects. And so it's a voluntary set of tools, not rules. And the goal really is for an organization to set up a process of continuous improvement. And so we don't really look at the standard as a minimum requirement, but rather as a process upon which organizations will look to improve their performance from year to year. So if you look at targeting an area for 1 year and you decide that next year we're going to double those efforts, it's really up to your discretion. And so the standard is applicable to any size and sector. Right now we have interest from both the public and private sector. And we have a representation from all different sizes of organization. And so it's really a growing momentum, as Sjors said. And the links to the Mental Health First Aid program, really what it's all about is enabling the employees to have the same base of understanding so that they can move forward together with that same awareness and knowledge of how to deal with situations that involve a mental health issue. So I'll pass it over to Sjors.
Thank you very much, Sam. So a question then is why mental health first aid? So when you think of mental health first aid, it's exactly what it is. It's a first aid course. You think of physical first aid, you can also think of mental health first aid as a way to provide early and effective intervention in the event of an emerging problem or a crisis. And we'll break that down a bit more in a couple of slides. But for now, the question is why mental health first aid? And of course, mental health problems are common, as we know. Professional help's not always on hand. People often don't know how to respond, and one of the big things is stigma around mental health problems. Not everyone seeks treatment, and part of that is because of that stigma. People may lack the insight. So a lot of the stigma that we talk about is not just stigma of an individual towards others that might have a mental health problem, but self-stigma is also a major issue. People who have a stigma about mental health are unable to recognize it in themselves. And people are often not well informed. Media tends to sensationalize more than inform in a lot of areas. So that's why we're doing mental health first aid as a course in Canada. The course itself started in 2006 in Alberta. It's since become a national part of the Mental Health Commission of Canada in 2010, and it's been going strong now for the last 4 years nationally. So in terms of how the reach has gone for mental health first aid in the last 6 or 8 years, we've trained over 100,000 Canadians in every province and territory. We've trained over 1,000 instructors, also in every province and territory. Of those 1,000 instructors, almost 1,100 instructors we've trained, about 850 of those are active and train a minimum of 3 courses every year. And we're also active now in every economic and social sector across the country, including oil and gas, construction, education, first responders, social services, correction services. There's barely a sector of the country that has not become involved in mental health first aid. I pulled some numbers from our database earlier today, so that just to give you a bit of a context of the reach of mental health first aid currently. And from January 2013 to April of this year, so in those 16 months, okay, bear with me now, there's some numbers. 23,504 participants representing 5,027 organizations took part in 1,941 courses delivered by 619 instructors. So over 20,000 participants, 5,000 organizations, almost 2,000 courses by over 600 instructors. That's the reach just in those 16 months. And the line's going up. We're training more and more people every single year. And this winter will prove to be no different. Before we get too much into the content of the course, one section that we talk about on the first morning of the first day of this 2-day course is stigma. So stigma exists across our country. I would argue that the conversation's been happening nationally for the last almost 7 or 8 years. It is helping to address the stigma issues and reducing the stigmatizing attitudes. So one of the questions we ask in the course to set the context is to imagine if we treated everyone like we treat people with mental illness. So a couple of the things that we show are a couple of PSAs that came out in the newspapers over one campaign that was done by the Canadian Psychiatric Research Foundation. Okay. So one of them is, it draws a parallel between physical and mental health problems. This one says heart disease, just another excuse for lazy people not to work. And we're all aware that that sounds absolutely ridiculous when we're talking about heart disease. So the question we ask in the course is, why does it sound equally ridiculous if you say anxiety or bipolar disorder or another mental health problem? So we're getting to the point where saying bipolar disorder is like heart disease, is where we're trying to go, that no one makes fun of heart disease anymore because it's legitimate. People know it's a real health problem, just like any mental health problem is, but it's getting to that point. Another one that's shown as well is from that same campaign that we like to share is that a lot of people get cancer because they just can't deal with reality. Again, it's nonsense. Nobody would ever say that about somebody having cancer. So the question is, would we say the same thing about somebody who has depression, for example? So what's socially acceptable to make fun of and what isn't? So that's where the question of stigma talks about. Before I get right into it, some myths and facts about mental health in case you're still not convinced that this is an area that needs more attention. The myth is that mental health problems are rare. The fact, as we said, is 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health problem in the course of a year, this year in Canada. There's a myth that people with mental health problems never recover. That's, of course, not true. With the right support, most people with mental health problems get better, just like most people with physical health problems get better. And the biggest myth out there, I think we've all know somebody in our lives who would have said the same thing, that people with depression could just snap out of it if they wanted to. And of course, that's totally a myth. People with depression have serious symptoms which are not in their control. It's not a choice. Mental health problems are not a choice. They're legitimate. And this is where we need to get to around stigma. So let's talk about the course a bit more specifically. So we know physical first aid. I'm sure if I were to ask the room, if we were all in the same room together, I'd ask everybody to put their hands up if they've taken a physical first aid course. And the majority of people in the room would raise their hands, especially in this room since we're all health-focused, most of us are. So the aims of first aid are to preserve life, prevent deterioration, promote healing, and provide comfort. That's what first aid is all about. What about mental health first aid? What are the aims of mental health first aid? Those are almost identical with a bit of a twist. They are to preserve life, to provide help to a person, to stop a problem from becoming more serious, promote recovery of good mental health, and provide comfort to a person experiencing a mental health problem. So the aims of first aid, physical first aid, mirror those of mental health first aid. One of the lines we use a lot these days when we're talking about mental health first aid is that if I sprained my ankle, chances are you would know what to do. But if I had a panic attack, chances are you wouldn't. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to get it so that every Canadian is within reach of effective mental health first aid, intervention of some kind. So what mental health first aid is not, going back to the questions that were asked during the registration process, mental health first aid is not workplace specific. Just like physical first aid is not workplace specific. It can be offered in the workplace. It can be a course that people are trained in the workplace or in their communities, but the skills are absolutely transferable. So if you know how to provide crisis first aid for a panic attack at work, you can do it at home, you can do it in your community, you can do it at the grocery store, you can do it at your son's or daughter's soccer game. You can do it wherever you need to do it because it's a skill that you bring with you everywhere. So it doesn't talk about accommodation, it doesn't talk about legislation or policies or managing employees or employer-employee discussions. It doesn't do those things specifically. It's a general course that offers people skills they can use in all of their environments, regardless of where they are. Mental health first aid was first started in Australia in 2001. Since then, it's become active in over 20 countries around the world. They're all modified to address the local cultural reality, as it was in Canada when it first arrived. And it's been subject to ongoing research and evaluation in many of the countries in which it is offered. There are 4 primary evidence-based outcomes that are consistent across the different countries and across the different studies that have been done. One is that participants in mental health first aid courses have a significantly greater recognition of the most common mental health problems or illnesses. So they can see signs and symptoms, they know what they're looking for, and they can identify them better after having taken the course for the most common mental health problems. They have what's called a decreased social distance from people with mental health problems or illnesses. So the example we would use on the course is to say, many of us, if we're walking down the street and we see somebody, a homeless person who seems to be acting in a bizarre way, what we do is we cross the street so as not to have to encounter that person. The social distance one is that if you are on that side of the street, you might actually stay on that side of the street and engage that person to decrease that social distance. Increased confidence in providing help to others, so knowing what to do and how to do it, and then also a demonstrated increase in the help actually provided. So mental health first aid participants are more confident to provide help and actually do provide help more often than those who haven't taken the course. Those are some of the evidence-based outcomes. So why mental health first aid in the workplace? Because the studies have shown that these are the benefits that will happen both in the workplace and at home. A couple of the outcomes that aren't often discussed are it's kind of becoming clear in the studies that the mental wellness of the individuals taking the course improves as well, just by virtue of the increase in knowledge, skills, and attitudes around mental health. Their own mental wellness tends to improve, so they become more mentally well in the end. And that leads me well into the next slide, because one of the other things, we never study this outcome, but we're fairly certain it's there, is that mental health first aid creates advocates for mental health first aid. We've had a lot of people at the start, or when they're thinking about taking the course, saying, wow, 12, 14 hours, that's a long time for a course. I don't think we can commit that kind of time in our workplace. Can we do something shorter? And our answer is always, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, we can't. We can't go shorter, similar as a physical first aid course can't go shorter, because what would you cut out? Like which parts of what mental health problems are not going to occur in your workplace or in your community that we don't have to talk about them in the course. But one of the outcomes we say is that we create advocates, because at the end of those 2 days, the majority of participants will come to the instructor and say, oh, you know who should take this course? Everybody in my sector. We had a retired federal prosecutor at a course, and he came and said, every prosecutor needs to take this course. We had a youth football coach come and take the course. He goes, every youth football coach needs to take this course. And we get that a lot from our participants. So it's an unstudied, unproven outcome that we create advocates for mental health first aid through mental health first aid. So there's 4, here's the course options, just to run over it. There's the basic mental health first aid course, which is for adults interacting with adults. It's a 12-hour course, generally offered over 2 consecutive days. It can be offered over 2 days up to 4 weeks apart, or in 4 3-hour sessions up to 4 weeks from beginning to end. So there's some flexibility around delivery, but that's the range. It has to be 12 hours, and those are the ways it can be broken down. There's mental health first aid for adults who interact with youth. That's 2 hours longer. It adds a couple of sessions, which I'll talk about in a second. It's also over 2 days or 4 sessions. We just recently launched mental health first aid for northern peoples, which is offered for people who live in the north. It's an 18-hour course and takes place over 3 consecutive days, which is the only option for that course. It's not broken down into separate days or separate sessions. It's 18 straight hours. And of course, there's instructor training. So we have a network of over 1,000 trained instructors across the country. And that's a 5-day course for the basic or the adults who interact with youth, and it's a 6-day course for northern peoples. And those are offered publicly throughout the country on an ongoing basis. Recertification requirements, for participants, there aren't any currently. So if you take the course once, you've taken the course and you're sufficient in terms of certification. However, we are recommending that people renew their course every 2 to 3 years to stay fresh, because as the conversation about mental health grows, so does the knowledge about mental health, and so does the content of the course then. So we're constantly updating it to ensure that it's relevant. we're going through a major update currently, actually. So, and for instructors, the requirement to be an instructor is that you maintain a minimum of 3 courses every year from your training day. So if you're trained in January 1st, you have until the next January to do at least 3 courses every single year. Those are the requirements to maintain certification. So what is mental health first aid? I tell people predominantly this course is about how to have a confident and comfortable conversation about mental health. So yeah, it talks about crisis first aid, it talks about recognizing signs and symptoms, it talks about stigma. Fundamentally, along with all those skills, knowledge, and attitudes that are learned, it's about how to have a confident and comfortable conversation about mental health. The hardest thing to do when you suspect somebody might be experiencing a mental health problem or emerging crisis, the hardest thing to do is to engage that person and start the conversation. Mental health first aid is really about that, and that's the ALGEE action plan. So assessing risk of suicide, listening, and essentially giving reassurance, encouraging professional support, and encouraging other supports. And this is the foundation of the course. It's applied to different mental health problems and illnesses. It's applied to different case studies and examples throughout the course. So this is really learn and internalize the ALGEE model as a way to ensure they're having a confident conversation that touches on all the requirements to provide effective mental health first aid. Some of the things that are covered in the course specifically are the signs and symptoms of developing mental health problems or illnesses. Specifically, the 4 sections in the basic course are around substance-related disorders, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and psychotic disorders. The youth course and the Northern Peoples course includes deliberate self-injury as a module, and the youth course also includes eating disorders as a module. So these are the primary ways that the course is broken down, is around these mental health problems or illnesses. So these are discussed around signs and symptoms, how to address ALGEE, and how to apply crisis first aid, which is another aspect of the course that's covered in these modules is around crisis first aid. So there's 5 crisis first aid interventions that are taught in the mental health first aid course, be it the basic, the youth, or the Northern Peoples. That's crisis first aid for suicidal behavior, crisis first aid for overdoses, for panic attacks, for reactions to traumatic events, those are acute stress reactions, and psychotic episodes. So these are the 5 areas that we spend time talking about crisis first aid. That's outside the ALGEE model, outside the signs and symptoms, but specifically, if you encounter somebody who is exhibiting suicidal behavior, here are the A to Z steps that you would take in that instance. So similar to physical first aid, if you see somebody lying unconscious on the floor, here are the ABC steps that you would take. Similar to that. So these are crisis first aid skills. Something to remember as we wrap up what this course is all about is that mental health first aid does not train people to become counselors or therapists. It's very important. Nobody on this call should ever think that taking a 2-day first aid course would prepare them to be a counselor or a therapist. And a lot of you are saying, of course it wouldn't, but some people surprisingly would think that it should. So mental health first aid is not about providing the skills to, well, certainly not to diagnose anybody with anything ever. It's not about being the ongoing support. And it's not about being anything other than a first aid intervener, to be able to provide that person with the encouragement they need to find the acceptable or reasonable professional or other supports. To wrap it up, Mental Health First Aid is a Public Health Agency of Canada best practice intervention. You can find it on the PHAC website under best practice interventions. And finally, making the case for investment in mental health first aid. You've seen the evidence-based outcomes. You've seen what the courses look like. You've seen how many organizations have already taken it, over 5,000. Organizations have sent at least 1 person, and many have gotten lots of people in their organizations trained. You can send staff to become instructors. You can send staff to become mental health first aid instructors. You can attend a public mental health first aid course, or you can host a mental health first aid course in your workplace. For any of these options, you're always welcome to contact us to get more information at MHFA at mentalhealthcommission.ca. That's going to wrap up my section of the presentation. I feel like I ripped through it pretty quickly there, but I left you with the slides so you can do it at your own pace. I tend to speak quickly when I get excited, and I'm fairly certain I spoke fairly quickly during that presentation because I got pretty excited about it. So apologies in retrospect. I look forward to hearing from people who are interested. I think you'll really enjoy Maureen Carnegie and Humber College's experience implementing mental health first aid. I'll pass it over to her. Maureen has, just so you know, has provided the mental health first aid course over 30 times in her role with Humber College. Maureen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just checked this morning. I think it's 28 or 30 courses that she has now delivered mental health first aid. So if anybody knows what's going on with this course, it's Maureen. So I will pass it over to you. Thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I hope you can all hear me well and that I don't speak too rapidly. It's really thrilling to see that we have over 400 people attending the webinar right now. That's fantastic, and I think a really great indication of the awareness that's being generated increasingly about mental illness and mental health problems. So you'll see from the outline that's on the screen right now what I'm going to cover in the next little bit. I understand that the slides are going to be accessible to all of the participants later, so I probably will not go into detail about each slide. I'm just going to sort of give you an overview. So to start with, I'm going to focus really on how Ontario colleges are addressing mental health issues, and specifically Humber's Mental Health First Aid Project. And as you can see from the slide, we'll start with a broad overview of mental health in the post-secondary context. I'll tell you a bit about Humber's project, including our goals and current outcomes. And then you'll hear some responses to the MHFA course of institutional leaders and staff participants, because I think it's always great to hear what people who've actually taken the course have to say about it. And as you'll see later, it's pretty consistently positive. Sam, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I would say roughly around 2005, mental health concerns really began to garner significant attention in the post-secondary environment. Not that mental health concerns weren't always there and prevalent, but I think as more exposure was happening in the media and more research was being made available to people, there really seemed to be this shift. And I think it also had to do with the fact that educational leaders in Ontario were really concerned about issues of student success and retention. And the idea that academic and workplace success are intimately linked with positive learning and work environments that support good mental health has really gained significant traction. And the provincial government even has backed this up with resources to support this direction. Can you go to the next slide, Sam? Okay, so understanding that the majority of post-secondary students fall within the age range with the highest occurrence of mental illness, if you remember the slide that Sjors showed us earlier, it's not difficult to convince people that focusing on mental health and well-being in the post-secondary sector is a really worthwhile path. And knowing that mental illness has significant economic impact, again, as Sjors talked about earlier, dedicating resources to address the psychological well-being of staff and students really does make good fiscal sense. So for those of you who are concerned about budgets and funding, even though you may think that the investment is great, the returns are even greater. So even though there was agreement that resources needed to be directed to mental health issues, those resources, of course, were still quite limited. So in Ontario, we were very lucky. Next slide, please, Sam. We were very lucky in that a significant opportunity emerged in 2012 when the Ontario Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, otherwise known as MTCU, dedicated funding to innovative mental health projects. And the intention of the fund was to create best practice models and approaches to mental health that are replicable across the system. So the idea was not to, provide more counselors at various post-secondary institutions as the way of addressing this. It really was meant to make significant change systemically. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Humber's project proposal. So we were already in the process of researching mental health education and intervention programs when this funding opportunity came out. And we had already decided on implementing mental health first aid training. So the MTCU funding provided us with the opportunity to expand and extend mental health first aid across the college system. And our proposal was to train 2,500 employees in mental health first aid and provide instructor training to 24 staff from interested institutions. Can you go to the next slide, Sam? Great. So our proposal was accepted, luckily. I wouldn't be talking to you if that hadn't happened. And it's been really enormously successful. The uptake of mental health first aid by Ontario colleges really surpassed our expectations, and we're well on track to meeting our goal of training 2,500 staff in mental health first aid. The demand for instructor training really did increase dramatically after colleges, various colleges hosted mental health first aid courses once they experienced what mental health first aid really is. People got very excited about having employees be able to provide this course on an ongoing basis. So really what that means, given the fact that we've now been able to train so many mental health first aid instructors, is that we've got this foundation of sustainability that will take us beyond the 3-year scope of the provincial funding. So it's a great opportunity where once the funding over, doesn't mean mental health first aid or mental illness awareness is over. We can continue to do the great work that has been going on. So let's talk a little bit about project goals. I'm not going to go through the slides in detail, but you'll see on the next couple of slides both the institutional and systemic level project goals. But I would say really they can be boiled down to 3 things. The first is acknowledging the pervasive existence of mental health problems and their impact on all realms of people's lives. Demystifying mental illness and mental health problems so that we have a shared knowledge of the realities people are dealing with. And offering skills building so that people not only understand mental health problems, but can recognize when they are occurring and know how to effectively intervene on a basic level to prevent problems from worsening. So I think personally that piece is really key. There's lots of information out there about different mental illnesses and mental health problems, but what I have encountered over and over again is that people say, that's great, I've got a better understanding of certain disorders or conditions, but what do I do? So I think the mental health first aid program really does provide some excellent training for anyone and everyone to be able to do that intervention piece in a really effective kind of way. Okay, can you go forward, please, Sam? You'll see the system level goals there, and let's go to the next one. Thank you. So although there's more awareness of mental illness these days, let's face it, it's still not the most sexy cause out there. But when you look at the business case for addressing mental health concerns in the workplace, in my opinion, smart leaders and managers understand that this is an area that really can't be ignored if one wants to improve morale and productivity in the workplace. And I think that once leaders acknowledge this and commit to addressing mental health in a meaningful way, it's really not difficult in our experience to get buy-in from employees who are confronted with mental health concerns on a regular basis, whether it's with colleagues or students and clients. I can tell you in the college system, I don't think that there is a person who would say that they haven't had instances where they were concerned about a colleague's mental health, students' mental health. Realistically, these kinds of issues are quite pervasive. So the mental health first aid model really does kind of tick all of the boxes when it comes to an evidence-based approach that is relatable easy to understand, and most importantly, again, provides actual actions for addressing the occurrence of mental health problems. So let's talk a little bit about creating buy-in, because I know that this is a concern for many people. That's great, it's a wonderful program, sounds excellent, but how do we convince people that engaging in mental health first aid training is important? Well, in the case of the system level for Ontario colleges, what we found is that initially some of the key decision makers were a little kind of suspicious, it seemed, about inviting us to deliver mental health first aid at their institution or sending staff for instructor training. And, after all, the course and the training were to be offered free of charge, and they involve significant time commitment. And again, this is under the auspices of the grant that we received. And I think that initially people might have wondered, how good is this program going to be if we're getting it for free? But once we began delivering the course and provided our first instructor training, we gained incredible traction, and demand for the program really just grew exponentially. And I think there was a realization that the mental health first aid program really does deliver on its stated intentions, and that engaging in this opportunity truly does lead to significant positive outcomes. I heard Sjors mention earlier about improvements in mental health or mental health awareness for participants. And I would echo that. In my experience, that is very common. It's really remarkable when you are delivering the course and people will, in big quotes, sort of come out about experiencing a mental illness, or they will approach the instructors and say, wow, what you just described, that's something that I've been dealing with for many, many years, and I finally have a better understanding. So I think that's a really key piece as well. Can we go to the outcomes, please, Sam? Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the outcomes of the project to date. And I think I can summarize by saying that the mental health first aid program really has gone a long way towards shifting people's understanding of mental illness and mental health problems, reducing the fear of addressing that so-called elephant in the room. And what I mean by that is, in the workplace, oftentimes we are very aware that one of our colleagues may be experiencing some mental health distress, but many people tend to avoid that. We don't know what to do or how to do it. So I think there's been a real shift in that. And we also see a really significant increase in the understanding of the value of early and direct intervention. And again, I can speak from the college system and talk about the fact that we've had many faculty who, again, they see all kinds of things happening in the classroom, and they know that a student might be in trouble. They know one of their colleagues might be in trouble, but they just haven't known how to address that. And after taking mental health first aid, we've had many, many people say, this is great, now I understand what I need to do. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please, Sam? Thank you. That is the second piece in terms of the systems level. And again, I think one of the fantastic things, given that we've had so many colleges participate in the project, is that we really have this increasingly shared understanding, shared and consistent understanding of mental health problems or illnesses across the college system. I think that is a huge plus, and I think that really helps with an overall kind of culture shift. So I'm going to show you on the next couple of slides those promised responses of some institutional leaders who really championed bringing in the mental health first aid project. And as you'll see, really, in their own words, that everyone who has brought this project, who has offered mental health first aid to their employees, pretty much consistently says that this was a fantastic opportunity and made such a difference across the organization. And, you know, people talk about the fact that this is the best professional development that they've had in years, that it really makes a difference, and that, you know, it's even though it's a 2-day, 12-hour kind of workshop / course situation, the time is well worth it. And let's look at some of the responses from the actual participants who've taken the course. And again, you know, quite honestly, I could have given you pages and pages of positive comments, but the bottom line is it's not just the leaders who value mental health first aid. Across the board, really, participant feedback has been consistently positive. From support staff to faculty to managers, people do find the information meaningful and relevant. And it's worth noting that in the post-secondary sector, we have participants from many disciplines who attend. So, you know, we're not just talking about teachers. We're talking about people who work in the nursing sector, emergency responders, business, media, trades. You know, we get really a really significant cross-section of people. So, you know, if you're wondering, is this applicable in my organization? I would argue that absolutely, absolutely. So it's not just relevant to education or the community services sector. It really is something that can be embraced in any and every workplace. And that's kind of the end of my piece.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Maureen, and thank you, Sjors. Really, thank you both for sharing your experience with the mental health first aid program and really telling us about how mental health first aid is really about starting to change the culture in an organization and allowing for the participants to get the awareness that they need, but also the knowledge to know what to do in a situation that involves a mental health issue. And I just have to drive back the point home about how this really ultimately helps meet some of the components of the national standard, where the standard helps an organization look at different psychosocial areas. So we have 13 in total in the standard. Some include civility and respect, and some others include leadership and roles and responsibilities. But ultimately, none of that work can truly happen unless employees have the knowledge and the awareness that they need to start having those discussions and opening the dialogue around mental health in the workplace. So I really commend Mental Health First Aid as a great program, and I'm so happy that we were able to make these links today. So we were fortunate to get many questions beforehand, before the webinar, where many of the participants submitted some questions. And during this session, we were able to compile some of the questions that we've been seeing in the chatter. And so one of the first questions I want to ask is, are there any French courses available?
Yep, there are. So the Mental Health First Aid course is available in both French and English for both the participant and instructor courses. So our network of instructors work independently in that they set their own training dates, they book their own venues. So anytime you are looking for a public course, you can come to our mentalhealthfirstaid.ca website and you can look up a course in your area there. They're always being updated every day. Like I said, in the 15 months in 2013 to April of this year, we had 1,900 courses across the country. So a course happening, like basically 2, 3, 4 courses every single day across the country. So you can certainly find something if you go to our website. So yes, they are available in French.
And that's pretty impressive. It seems like there's a lot of opportunities across the country. And I know you touched upon that, the instructor portion, but is it only a 2-day course? Is it in terms of that structure? So
for an in-house course, for what we call an in-house or an agency course, we can provide either the 2-day basic, the 2-day youth, or the 3-day Northern Peoples course in-house. We can also provide an in-house instructor training. So this is not an uncommon thing. Humber College, for example, has done this a number of times, where we will send one of our master trainers into an agency and we'll provide the instructor training to a group of employees. So the group size is a minimum of 8, maximum of 12 people in the group, and we'll do the full 5-day instructor training with just that core group of people, and then they go on to train people within their organization on an ongoing basis. It's a fairly common model that larger organizations use that have a high turnover, like universities or a lot of large workplaces, Government of Canada included, have a lot of in-house instructors who do this course on an ongoing basis. Excellent.
The next question I have maybe can be answered by both Maureen and Sjors. I'll leave it to Maureen first. Maureen, from your perspective, are you aware of other colleges and universities adopting a similar approach where, you know, we've seen there was an opportunity for funding and you've really mobilized everyone at the college to go towards that one vision, that one project that you've developed? Can you comment on that?
Well, for anybody in the Ontario post-secondary sector, there's probably an awareness out there that the ministry did provide this, again, this opportunity for funding for various different proposals. So a number of institutions are working on, you know, were successful in getting their proposal funded. So mental health first aid is what we're doing through the Humber project, but there's so many different pieces out there that are happening in post-secondary, both in the college and university system. And I think with the mental health first aid project, one of the great things about it is that it is a fabulous complement to any other kind of mental health strategies that are going on. You know, we've been to some of the colleges that are really actively involved in doing mental health awareness and intervention. And again, this piece really just complements it. So I'm not.
Excellent. Sjors, can you expand, I guess, just from what you've seen across the country? Are there other provinces that are going in similar endeavors, or?
Yeah, so we're just in the middle of a project with the government of Alberta. That's also, they're focusing on social workers and youth protection workers across the province are being trained with mental health first aid for adults who interact with youth. So the training is there. There's over 300 courses being offered in the last year and a half in that province for that sector of the workforce. So it's happening there. A lot of organizations themselves are doing it independently. So in terms of like post-secondary, we have over 30 universities and colleges outside of Ontario that are doing this course as well on an in-house basis, or have sent people to public courses to be trained. So it's picking up steam. I think what ends up happening is that there's a groundswell of support on an organizational or an individual level, which then percolates up until the right person hears about it in the right position, who can bring it forward to someone who can make the decision. Yeah. Like MCTU in Ontario was really on the front edge of this when they approved Humber College's grant, and Humber College got the right grant in front of the right people at the right time to make this happen for them. So, I mean, their model is one that's absolutely unique, and I don't think it's not irreplicable. It can be copied in other places as a model, I think.
We got a question from the audience in regards to Saskatchewan. Do you know if there's anything going on in Saskatchewan or any other provinces in Alberta, or? Right now it's, sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, right now it's in terms of like large-scale provincial government supported grants. The ones that we're aware of that are actively involved in the Government of Alberta grant, and Humber College is actively involved in this one. Okay. The Bell Alliance Foundation sponsored mental health first aid implementation for first responders in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. It's currently an ongoing implementation. So one thing I want to address as well, I see is coming up in the chat box quite a bit, is around the cost of the course. I did mention it earlier. So the model that mental health first aid uses is that once an instructor is trained as an instructor, they set their own prices for their courses. So when you look on our website, you'll see a range of prices. Usually it goes somewhere between $150 to $350 per course, which is around the range you can expect to look at. So we encourage anyone who's looking to take a public course to look at the website and to compare the prices of different instructors. So you'll find the blend of the right dates at the right price and the right location for you that will work for you. In terms of the instructor courses, those are set rates, and those courses can only be offered by Mental Health First Aid Canada. We have a group of 9 master trainers across the country that we employ on a contract basis to deliver those courses for us. So that cost is fixed at $3,000 to become a basic or youth instructor, and it is $4,000 to become a Northern Peoples instructor. So those are fixed costs. In terms of internationally, there are 21 countries that offer mental health first aid internationally, but you must be certified in each individual country. So if you're certified with Mental Health First Aid Canada, you cannot move to Australia and deliver the course. You have to become certified in Australia to deliver the course because the cultural context is different. That's 4 questions in one. How's that?
Really good. So could you remind our listeners, and I know that Lori's been really great online to suggest links, but can you just remind everyone where to find the information about training and becoming an instructor? That's on the Mental Health First Aid website?
Yes. MHFA.ca, or if you want to type more, it's mentalhealthfirstaid.ca. But both of those will get you to the same website. If you are en français, it's pssm.ca or Premier Soins Santé Mentale.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're just about completed the question and answer period.
Oh wait, somebody just made a comment.
Someone else just made a comment.
I was wrong. We did work with the governments of Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut to develop the Northern Peoples version of mental health first aid. I didn't mean to miss that. They were actively involved throughout the entire process, the 3-year process of developing that version.
So it was a consultative process. Everyone was very engaged, and are there any plans ensuing from that, or I guess it's kind of just up to...
Now it's in an implementation phase, so
okay.
There are trained instructors who are traveling the territories to deliver this training on an ongoing basis.
Excellent. No, it's okay. And so we wouldn't want this conversation to stop there, and so I would suggest that participants take a look at our collaborative spaces, which we have online. And so if you have questions we didn't have a chance to answer, you can come to the collaborative space and visit the workplace section, where we'll be glad to chat. And really what the idea of the collaborative space is for us to share information and really create an online community. And so as you'll see on the slide there, it's pretty easy to access, and we'd be happy to continue that conversation online afterwards. And so if folks have any questions, I would encourage you to ask those questions online, and of course you can follow up with me by email as you'll see there. A reminder that our next webinar is on September 24th, and so if you have time to fill out the survey at the end of this webinar, I would ask you to do so. This is really valuable information for us. It'll help inform the topics in our future webinars, and if you do have any questions, it might also be an opportunity to ask them there. The PowerPoint presentation and future presentations will be posted as a PDF for free on our website in both English and French. And I would say within the next 2 weeks, it just takes a bit of time with translation sometimes, but usually within a 2-week window, we can get everything up there on the website. And of course, the recording will also be made available on the Commission's YouTube channel. And so I would once again like to thank everyone for joining the conversation today, and hope that you can make it at our next webinar on September 24th, which will also be on the topic of workplace mental health. Thank you so much.